I felt stupid. And I felt used. My name is Angela Moreno. I'm 41, and for the last 7 years I believed I was building something real with my husband. Not just a marriage. A future. A legacy. A family business that would carry our name long after we were gone. Instead, I was building it for someone else. Victor and I met when I was 32. He was charming in a quiet way, the kind of man who didn't speak loudly but made you feel safe just by standing next to you. When he told me he wanted to open a specialty import company, organic Latin American products, small farmers, ethical sourcing, I fell in love with the vision as much as I fell in love with him. We started in our garage. I used my savings. Every dollar I had from my marketing career went into licenses, branding, website development, packaging. I designed the logo at our kitchen table at 2 a.m. while he slept beside me, exhausted from supplier calls. I told myself we were a team. That sacrifice now meant freedom later. For the first 2 years, I didn't take a salary. Just until we're stable, Victor would say, brushing my hair back gently. We'll both win in the end. I believed him. I worked full days managing social media campaigns, building partnerships, negotiating contracts, answering customer emails at midnight. When our first major retailer signed us, I cried in the shower so Victor wouldn't see how overwhelmed I was. I thought those tears were from gratitude. Now I know they were from exhaustion. What I didn't know, what I wasn't supposed to know, was that legally, I didn't own anything. The company documents were always handled. Victor said paperwork stressed me out. He'd laugh softly and say, "You're the creative brain. Let me handle the boring legal stuff." I trusted him. 3 weeks ago, everything shattered. It started with a bank notification. A large transfer I didn't recognize. The account name attached to our business funds wasn't Victor's. It wasn't mine. It was Sophia Moreno, his sister. At first, I assumed it was an error. Sophia was 29, impulsive, always jumping between business ideas. Victor helped her financially sometimes. I told myself this was temporary. A loan. Family support. But when I confronted him, his face changed in a way I had never seen before. Not guilt. Not fear. Calculation. "It's complicated," he said. "You wouldn't understand." That was the moment something cold settled in my chest. I insisted on seeing the corporate filings. I drove to the state office myself. I stood at the counter with shaking hands while the clerk printed the registration documents. Owner: Sophia Moreno. Managing Director: Victor Moreno. My name was nowhere. 7 years. My savings. My labor. My unpaid work. My reputation attached to that brand. Legally, I was just an employee. An unpaid one. When I confronted Victor that night, he didn't even deny it. "It was for protection," he said calmly. "In case anything happened between us." Between us. The words echoed like a warning I had somehow missed for years. He had planned for our marriage to fail. And I had funded my own replacement. I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt like a lie. Victor lay beside me that night, breathing evenly, as if nothing had changed. As if he hadn't just erased me from 7 years of work with a single sentence. I stared at the ceiling and replayed every memory, searching for the moment I should have seen it. There had to be signs. The late-night calls he took outside. The way he insisted on handling meetings with lawyers alone. The subtle shift in tone whenever I asked about long-term ownership. I used to interpret it as stress. Pressure. The weight of responsibility. Now it looked like strategy. The next morning, I made coffee with shaking hands. The kitchen smelled the same: roasted beans, cinnamon, sunlight through the blinds. Everything looked normal. That was the most disturbing part. Betrayal doesn't change the furniture. It just changes the air. Victor walked in wearing the navy shirt I bought him for our 5th anniversary. He kissed my cheek like always. "Let's not make this dramatic," he said quietly. "You're overreacting." Overreacting. I felt something inside me harden. "I built that company," I said. My voice sounded unfamiliar, steadier than I felt. "With my money. With my work." "And you were compensated," he replied. I laughed. It came out sharp. "With what?" "Love." His jaw tightened. That was the first crack in his composure. "You lived comfortably," he continued. "The house, the car. The house is in your name," I interrupted. "The car lease is under the business." Silence. For the first time, he didn't have an immediate answer. Then he said it. Calm. Clinical. Prepared. "Sophia is the legal owner because if we divorce, you can't touch the company." The words didn't even tremble. Not if. When. I realized this wasn't protection. It was a plan. A long-term, carefully structured exit strategy. "And were you planning to tell me?" I asked. He shrugged. Actually shrugged. It would have been messy. Messy. As if my entire identity had not been woven into that brand. As if I hadn't introduced myself at conferences as co-founder. As if I hadn't stayed up nights building supplier relationships while he slept. I went upstairs and opened my laptop. I logged into the business email server. My access was still active, for now. I began forwarding contracts, partnership emails, marketing drafts, everything I had personally created, to a private folder. Not to steal. To survive. Halfway through, I found something that made my stomach drop. An email thread between Victor and a divorce attorney. Dated 11 months ago. Subject line: Asset protection structure. My hands went cold. They had discussed transferring additional revenue streams. Moving intellectual property. Gradual financial separation to minimize exposure. Exposure. That was what I was. A liability. I closed the laptop slowly. Downstairs, I could hear Victor on the phone, laughing lightly. As if our life wasn't cracking open upstairs. That was the moment I stopped feeling like a wife. And started feeling like evidence. I stopped crying. And that scared me more than anything. Grief I could understand. Rage I could manage. But the silence inside me the next morning felt surgical. Precise. Like something had been cut out. Victor behaved as if we were negotiating a minor disagreement about furniture. He suggested we have a calm discussion about next steps. He even used that tone, corporate, detached, almost polite. Next steps. 7 years reduced to bullet points. I watched him differently now. The way he avoided direct eye contact when I mentioned ownership. The way his shoulders tensed when I brought up the lawyer's email. He didn't deny it. He reframed it. "You're being emotional," he said. I had to think rationally. Rationally. As if love was irrational. As if partnership was naive. I asked him one question that made him pause. "When did you decide our marriage might fail?" He didn't answer immediately. His silence was the answer. Sophia called that afternoon. I almost didn't pick up. But I needed to hear her voice. She sounded sweet. Concerned. Too concerned. "Angela, I had no idea you'd misunderstand," she said softly. "Victor just needed someone he could trust legally. It's temporary." Temporary. 7 years is temporary? I asked. She sighed dramatically. "You know how messy divorces are." He just wanted to protect what he built. What he built. I felt heat rise in my chest. "I built it too," I said. There was a pause. Then, carefully. "But legally you didn't." That was the moment I understood something darker. This wasn't just Victor's plan. It was family strategy. I started replaying holidays in my mind. The subtle comments. Sophia joking that I was the marketing girl. Victor's mother praising him as the visionary. Me being thanked for helping. Helping. I was never positioned as equal. Just supportive. The realization hit slowly and cruelly. They never saw me as permanent. I was the wife. Wives can be replaced. Ownership stays in the bloodline. That night I opened our joint financial statements. I combed through transactions I had ignored for years. Small transfers. Consulting fees paid to Sophia long before she was officially listed as owner. Gradual shifts of profit distribution. It wasn't sudden. It was phased. Engineered. He didn't wake up one day and betray me. He built the betrayal brick by brick while I was building the brand. Around midnight, Victor knocked on the office door. "We don't have to make this ugly," he said quietly. "We can separate peacefully." Separate. As if we were two neutral parties dissolving a contract. "And what exactly do I walk away with?" I asked. He hesitated. Just slightly. "I can offer you a settlement." Offer. Not share. Not divide. Offer. In that second, something clicked into place. He thought I was weak because I trusted him. He thought I would accept crumbs because I was tired. He forgot something. I built the marketing strategy that made this company visible. And visibility works both ways. I didn't scream. I started calculating. The moment Victor used the word settlement, something inside me shifted from wounded wife to strategist. If he had spent 11 months planning his exit, then I would spend however long it took planning my survival. The next morning, I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer. Not a family friend. Not someone recommended by Victor's circle. I searched quietly, methodically, reading reviews, checking credentials, studying case outcomes. I chose a woman known for dismantling complex financial structures in divorce cases. If Victor wanted rational, I would give him rational. Her office smelled like paper and espresso. Clean. Controlled. I liked that. I laid everything out. The garage beginnings, my savings, the unpaid years, the ownership under Sophia's name, the email labeled asset protection structure. I watched her expression carefully. She didn't look surprised. He transferred ownership to a third party before filing? She asked. Yes. And you contributed financially and operationally from the beginning? Every step. She leaned back slightly. This isn't uncommon, she said calmly. But it's rarely as airtight as they think. A thin current of hope ran through me. She explained terms I had never wanted to learn. Constructive trust, marital assets, fraudulent conveyance. Words that sounded cold but felt like oxygen. If we could prove that the transfer was made to shield marital property in anticipation of divorce, it could be challenged. It wouldn't be easy. But it wasn't hopeless. Then she asked a question that pierced deeper than the legal strategy. Did you document your role? I hesitated. Yes. Emails. Contracts. Marketing plans. Investor presentations. Good, she said. Because this isn't just about ownership. It's about contribution. Contribution. That word felt validating in a way Victor never had. When I returned home, Victor was in the backyard on a call. Laughing again. Always laughing. As if he had already moved on. He looked up when he saw me. Where were you? Out. His eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't used to vague answers from me. I had always been transparent. Available. Accountable. I wasn't going to be that version anymore. That night, he brought up the settlement again. I'm willing to be generous, he said. You deserve something. Deserve. As if he were awarding me a bonus. How generous? I asked calmly. He named a number. It was less than what I had invested. Less than my initial savings. I stared at him. That's insulting. He stiffened. It's fair. Fair. The word echoed between us like a broken promise. I realized then that he genuinely believed he was being reasonable. In his mind, he was protecting his future. Securing his bloodline. Ensuring Sophia retained control. In his narrative, I was an emotional complication. But here's what Victor didn't understand. I had built the brand's public story. I knew the investors personally. I knew the supplier contracts. I knew which distributors trusted me, not him. And trust, unlike paperwork, doesn't transfer with a signature. That night, for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt dangerous. I began to notice everything. The tone. The timing. The lies between sentences. Once you see betrayal, you can't unsee it. Every conversation with Victor felt rehearsed. Every word measured. He wasn't reacting anymore, he was managing. Managing me. He started coming home later. Said he was aligning with Sophia on expansion plans. Expansion. The audacity almost made me laugh. They were planning growth while quietly preparing to erase me. One evening, I followed him. Not dramatically. Not hysterically. Calmly. He drove downtown to a sleek glass office building we had once toyed together when we dreamed about one day moving out of the garage. I had imagined us signing that lease as partners. He went inside alone. I waited in the car, my fingers gripping the steering wheel, watching lights flicker on in a corner office. Our logo was already displayed on the directory in the lobby. Our logo. I walked in. The receptionist smiled politely. Can I help you? I'm with Moreno Imports, I said automatically. The words tasted different now. She checked the system. Oh, of course. MS. Moreno and Mr. Moreno are upstairs. MS. Moreno. Not me. Sophia. The elevator ride felt endless. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked composed. Too composed. When I stepped into the office suite, I saw them through the glass conference room. Victor. Sophia. And a man in a tailored suit I recognized from investor meetings. They were laughing. On the table in front of them was a printed document with the header: Leadership Transition Plan. My chest tightened, but I didn't turn away. Sophia saw me first. Her smile froze. Victor followed her gaze. For a split second, real panic flashed across his face. Then he stood up quickly. Angela, what are you doing here? I looked around slowly. The new furniture. The polished floors. The framed brand photography, images I had personally art-directed. I was curious, I said evenly. About the transition. The investor cleared his throat uncomfortably. Victor tried to guide me out of the room, hand lightly on my elbow, as if I were unstable. Now isn't the time. No, I said softly. It's exactly the time. I stepped closer to the table and glanced at the document. Effective immediately, Sophia Moreno will assume full executive control of Moreno Imports to ensure long-term strategic continuity. Effective immediately. They weren't preparing. They were replacing. My name was mentioned once. As foundational marketing contributor. Reduced to a footnote in my own creation. I looked at Victor. Were you planning to inform me before or after you announced this publicly? His jaw tightened. We were going to discuss it. Discuss. After signing. After finalizing. After erasing. The investor avoided my eyes. That told me everything. He knew. They all knew. Except me. Humiliation burned through me, hot and sharp. Not because they were moving forward, but because they assumed I would quietly disappear. They had already written the story of my exit. They forgot one thing. I know how to rewrite narratives. I started planning quietly. Like a predator. Calm, focused, invisible. The first thing I did was document everything. Every late night I had worked. Every email I had written. Every supplier call. Every investor pitch. I printed contracts, copied messages, highlighted contributions. I created a timeline of my labor, my money, my ideas. 7 years, all laid bare. Nothing could be dismissed as trivial. Then I started reaching out. Former partners, investors, suppliers. Carefully. Politely. Subtly reminding them of the person who built relationships, secured deals, and delivered results. Not in anger. In quiet authority. In competence. In truth. It worked faster than I expected. By the end of the week, messages of support trickled in. Questions from investors. Angela, did you handle this? Was this your campaign? Can we discuss a proposal with you directly? The respect I had earned didn't transfer to Sophia automatically. They knew who had delivered. They remembered my work. Victor started noticing. He tried to assert control, calling meetings, insisting on joint appearances. But his words sounded hollow. His authority was paper-thin. Everyone around me remembered the real story. One afternoon, Sophia confronted me directly. I saw her in the lobby of our old office, now formerly hers. "Angela, I'm just doing what Victor asked," she said nervously. "He planned this for stability." I smiled. Calm. Cold. Stability? "You mean theft with a smile," I said. Her face paled. She tried to rationalize. "I'm just following the legal ownership." "I didn't mean, you meant exactly this," I interrupted. "You're playing a part in erasing someone's life work." Sophia's eyes darted to Victor's empty office. He wasn't there. She realized I wasn't bluffing. I told her quietly, "I'm taking back what's mine. All of it. And I'm doing it legally." She swallowed hard. Said nothing. Over the next few days, I met with my lawyer again. Each conversation fortified me. We began drafting motions to challenge the transfers. Evidence of my contribution, proof of my financial input, the intent to defraud marital assets, it all went into our case. I learned the language of leverage. The mechanics of power. I discovered that patience could be sharper than anger, and precision more dangerous than shouting. Victor called that night. "Angela, we can still settle," he said, tone soft, persuasive. "No need to make this messy." I smiled, a dangerous smile. "Messy?" I said. "No, Victor. You made it messy the moment you tried to erase me. Now I'm just cleaning it up." He didn't respond immediately. I could hear hesitation, fear. Not the panic from before, this was deeper, more aware. He realized, finally, that I was no longer the powerless wife. I was the force he had underestimated. I went to bed that night knowing something important. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was reclaiming respect. Justice. My own story. And I would not lose. I stopped pretending. The fear had gone. Victor called that morning, voice calm but clipped. "Angela, can we talk?" I smiled without warmth. "We're talking. Right now." He hesitated. He wasn't used to me setting the terms. For years, I had accommodated, adapted, softened my voice, smoothed his ego. That version of me was gone. I went to the office, my folder of evidence in hand. I watched as he realized that this time, I wasn't negotiating out of fear. I wasn't begging. I was in command of the narrative. "You're serious," he said, almost whispering. "I've never been more serious," I replied. We sat across from each other. The table between us felt like a battlefield. I placed my folder down. "Here's everything. Emails, contracts, investor letters. I've documented 7 years of my contribution. Legally, you can't erase it." He leaned back, trying to maintain composure. "You don't understand the strategy. You're emotional." "Strategy?" I repeated. "You call hiding assets and secretly planning a divorce a strategy? That's manipulation, Victor. Pure manipulation." I watched his face tighten. The man who had always appeared untouchable, always in control, was suddenly calculating. Calculating how to respond. but I had already planned 3 moves ahead. I mentioned meetings I had arranged with our investors. I referenced conversations I had quietly initiated with suppliers. Each word subtly reminded him that the foundation of the company, the trust, the networks, the credibility, rested on me. Not on him. Not on Sophia. You can't intimidate me anymore, I said quietly. I know your game, and I won't play by your rules. Victor's hands clenched. For a moment, I almost saw the man I married, the charming, persuasive Victor. But it was only a flicker. The real him, the schemer, was still there. He realized I was no longer a pawn. I had become a player. Later that night, I met with my lawyer again. We strategized precise steps. Formal notices, asset protection counterclaims, and a roadmap for recovering control over the parts of the business he had tried to hide. Each step was methodical, precise, legal, ruthless if necessary. For the first time in months, I felt clarity. Power. Control. Not vengeance, that would be too messy. This was justice. And justice, I realized, was about more than money. It was about reclaiming my agency, my voice, and my dignity. Every meeting, every email, every document now became a weapon, a shield. My past labor could no longer be stolen. I would ensure that every ounce of my contribution was recognized, validated, and restored. By the end of that week, I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing to take back everything that was mine. Every betrayal, every deception, every lie would be met with strategy, precision, and relentless determination. Victor thought he was untouchable. But he had underestimated me. And that was the mistake that would change everything. I stopped negotiating. I started executing. Victor's calls became tense. He tried to charm, to manipulate, to guilt me into settling quietly. But I had learned his language. I could hear the rhythm of control in his voice, and I refused to dance. I spent days assembling a dossier. Each contract, each email, each financial statement carefully annotated. I mapped every decision I had influenced, every client I had secured, every dollar I had contributed. I created a timeline of labor, investment, and creativity, 7 years of my life, irrefutable, undeniable. When I scheduled a formal meeting with the investors, I was calm, polished, confident. I walked in not as a wife, not as a contributor, but as a founder, as the architect of their trust. Faces that had once deferred to Victor now looked at me with respect, acknowledgement. I presented the evidence clearly, highlighting the contributions that had made the company what it was. There was no room for debate. Victor appeared in the meeting, smug at first. He expected panic. He expected tears. He expected me to beg or compromise. But I didn't give him any of it. He quickly realized the tide had shifted. The investors saw me. They heard me. They remembered whose effort had built the relationships, who had created the marketing campaigns, who had fought for deals while he smiled and took credit behind closed doors. Sophia sat quietly, flustered. She could no longer hide behind Victor's scheme. I could see the fear in her eyes. The confidence that had allowed her to walk into that office and claim ownership began to crumble. Later that day, I received a call from my lawyer. Victor is asking for mediation. He's realizing he can't push this through without risk. I smiled. I didn't celebrate. I simply recognized the shift. Control was no longer his. It was mine to guide. That night, I sat alone in the office, reviewing every detail again. Each piece of evidence, each memory, each contribution meticulously documented. I was not just fighting for money, I was reclaiming my life. The humiliation, the erasure, the betrayal, all of it would be addressed. I would emerge not just financially intact but respected, validated, and empowered. And I knew one thing clearly. Victor had underestimated me. Underestimated my resolve, my foresight, my ability to mobilize truth. The man who thought he was untouchable would now see the consequences of his arrogance. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel anticipation. Not fear. Not anger. Anticipation. The storm I had weathered was no longer looming over me. I was the storm now. I stopped doubting myself. Every instinct I had was proving right. Victor tried to intimidate me with legal threats. "You'll never succeed," he said in one call, his voice tight with frustration. "The ownership is legally binding. You have no claim." I listened politely, calmly, and then I smiled inside. He had already given himself away. He revealed the fear I had never seen before, the subtle panic behind his carefully constructed confidence. He believed I would crumble. He thought I would panic. But I had the proof. I had witnesses. I had documentation. I had the truth. I started sending formal letters, each one carefully worded. To investors, to partners, to suppliers. Each letter reminded them of the real architect of Moreno Imports. I never mentioned Victor or Sophia as antagonists. I simply reminded them of facts, of history, of who had earned their trust. Responses came back almost immediately. Polite inquiries, supportive messages, some tentative offers to collaborate directly with me. It was subtle, strategic, powerful. Victor noticed. He tried to control the narrative in meetings, speaking over me, interrupting, trying to diminish my contributions. But he failed. Every person in the room remembered who had built relationships, who had navigated challenges, who had delivered results while he took credit behind closed doors. Sophia tried to speak for him, but her voice faltered under scrutiny. She realized the game had changed. I was no longer reactive. I was proactive. I was precise. I was unstoppable. By the end of the week, Victor's confidence had eroded completely. He attempted a final manipulation, an ultimatum, a proposed compromise that would let him save face. I reviewed it calmly, my lawyer by my side. I countered with evidence. Documentation. Witness statements. A strategic plan that made it clear. The transfer of ownership would be legally challenged, and any attempt to suppress my claim would backfire publicly and financially. I could see the shift in Victor's eyes. The man who had controlled everything, who had plotted my erasure, realized that the game had changed. He no longer held leverage. He was cornered by truth, accountability, and the force he had underestimated, me. For the first time in years, I felt complete clarity. My years of dedication, intelligence, and persistence were now armor. My confidence wasn't born from arrogance but from evidence, strategy, and unshakable resolve. And I knew, deep down, that the victory was not just about reclaiming ownership. It was about reclaiming myself. My dignity. My agency. My life. No one could erase me. Not Victor. Not Sophia. Not anyone. I felt a strange calm. The storm wasn't coming. I was creating it. Victor called that afternoon. His voice was sharper now, forced. Angela, we need to find a resolution. This is getting out of hand. I paused. Calmly, deliberately. Resolution? I asked. Victor, you think taking everything and erasing me is a resolution? That's not a solution. That's theft. He hesitated. For the first time, I sensed uncertainty. The man who always projected confidence was faltering. Not because I yelled. Not because I cried. But because I had taken control, methodically, strategically, legally. I spent the next hours contacting investors, suppliers, and partners. I shared updates, but framed them as factual reports of my work, my influence, my stewardship over the company's growth. I didn't attack Victor. I didn't attack Sophia. I simply reminded everyone of the truth, the facts, the person who had built Merino Imports from the ground up. The responses were subtle but powerful. Messages of recognition, reassurances, and inquiries about future collaboration. Trust doesn't transfer with papers. It lives in relationships, and I had nurtured them for years. Victor tried to interrupt me during a scheduled investor call. He attempted his usual charm, his usual manipulation. But every word he spoke sounded hollow. Investors quietly deferred to me, nodded at my points, asked clarifying questions only to me. I could almost hear his confidence cracking through the speakerphone. Sophia's nervousness was tangible. She had overplayed her role. Now she had no defense. I could see her calculating every misstep, realizing she had walked into a battle she wasn't prepared to fight. That night, I met with my lawyer again. We reviewed documents, structured next moves, prepared motions to formally challenge the asset transfers. Every action was deliberate, precise, unassailable. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. Legal, undeniable, and inevitable. I sat back in my chair and breathed deeply. For the first time, I felt unshakable. I had taken my pain, my betrayal, my anger, and transformed it into power. Every action, every decision, every plan was aimed at reclaiming what was mine, not just financially, but emotionally, psychologically, and morally. Victor had underestimated me at every step. He had assumed fear would dictate my choices. He had assumed compliance. He had assumed weakness. He was wrong. And he would see just how wrong. I became obsessed with precision. Not anger. Not revenge. Only accuracy. Each night, I reviewed emails, contracts, invoices, every document that traced my role in Merino Imports. I highlighted, annotated, cross-referenced, a lattice of proof showing my labor, investment, and creativity. 7 years condensed into an unassailable record. Every project I had led, every client I had secured, every deal I had fought for, meticulously documented. Nothing could be dismissed as trivial contribution. I created a timeline. It wasn't just dates, it was a map of influence and decision-making. When Victor had signed deals or approved campaigns, I marked my input, my research, my strategic recommendations. When Sophia claimed credit, I highlighted where I had paved the way. It became undeniable. Then I started rehearsing the story. Not for Victor. Not for Sophia. For myself. Speaking aloud the sequence of events, the logic of my evidence, the narrative that would hold in court, in investor meetings, even in public perception. I tested phrasing, tone, pauses, everything calculated to convey authority, not emotion. I wanted the world to see me as the architect, the strategist, the rightful leader. I organized meetings with key investors and suppliers in small, controlled groups. I walked them through my timeline, my documentation, my influence. I framed everything as facts, letting the evidence speak louder than accusations. Faces shifted from polite acknowledgement to quiet respect. The weight of truth began to tilt the balance in my favor. I also started anticipating counterattacks. Victor would try to spin the narrative, to frame me as emotional, irrational, or petty. I prepared for it. I catalogued correspondence, built layers of verification, collected testimonies. I transformed myself into a fortress of facts. Every claim he could make had a documented refutation. Every argument he could present had precedent, proof, and witnesses ready to neutralize it. The most powerful moment came when I realized something critical. I didn't need to outshout or intimidate anyone. I just needed to be precise, unwavering, undeniable. The weight of truth, the clarity of evidence, the consistency of my actions, that was more dangerous than any outburst. Victor still thought he controlled the game. Sophia still believed she could manipulate perception. But I had already turned the tide. Every carefully documented email, every witness statement, every verified financial record, they were my army, my shield, and my sword. And now, I was ready to wield them. For the first time, I felt complete alignment between mind, strategy, and purpose. I wasn't just fighting for a share of a business. I was asserting ownership of my life, my contributions, my identity. Every detail mattered. Every document mattered. Every step was deliberate. The storm was coming, but I was no longer at its mercy. I had become the strategist, the planner, the inevitable force. I made my move. No hesitation. No fear. Only resolve. Victor thought he controlled every door, every document, every account. He didn't realize I had already prepared. I started with the office. I cleared out my personal files, backed up evidence, and transferred critical records to a secure location. Every email chain, every invoice, every contract that proved my contributions was copied, indexed, and time-stamped. Nothing could be erased, hidden, or manipulated. Then I met with my lawyer to initiate formal challenges to the asset transfers. Each signature, each notarized document, each witness statement strengthened my case. We filed motions to freeze unauthorized transfers, and we requested immediate recognition of my ownership stakes. The legal machinery began to move, and I felt the power of structure, law, and precision backing me. Next came the financial audit. I requested independent verification of all company accounts, investments, and financial statements. I wanted transparency, accountability, and documentation. Every dollar Victor tried to divert or hide would now be recorded, scrutinized, and publicly accounted for. At home, I had to act decisively. I packed my belongings, separating personal items from shared marital property. I left behind what I could, took what proved my identity and contribution. But more than possessions, I carried knowledge, evidence, and control. I was leaving the past behind without abandoning my claims, because they were already secured. Victor tried to stop me. Pleas, attempts at intimidation, reminders of legal authority, but I didn't flinch. I had rehearsed this. I had documented everything. I knew every loophole, every strategy, every possible counterplay. Sophia sent a message, a feeble attempt at reconciliation or manipulation. I ignored it. She was irrelevant. She had been a pawn. The only ones I needed to confront were facts, lore, and the truth. By the end of the day, I had moved out, established a secure location for evidence, and scheduled meetings with investors and partners. I felt a sense of liberation, but it was tempered with precision. This wasn't escape. It was a calculated advance. Victor would realize soon enough that the battle had shifted. I wasn't running. I was taking command. Every step I had taken, every piece of evidence I had prepared, every contact I had nurtured, all converged into a single unstoppable momentum. For the first time in years, I felt untouchable. Not because I had avoided danger, but because I had confronted it with preparation, strategy, and unshakable resolve. The storm had arrived. And I was ready. I felt the culmination of every plan, every calculation, every quiet hour of preparation. This was the moment that would define me. Victor called again, his tone brittle, strained. Angela, you don't understand. This could destroy everything. I leaned back in my chair, calm, collected. Destroy what? The lies you've built? The secrets you've tried to hide? No, Victor. I'm restoring balance. I'm reclaiming what's mine. That night, I met with investors and key partners. I presented the full timeline of contributions, documented emails, financial evidence, and witness statements. I spoke with clarity, authority, and composure. The room was silent, every face focused, every nod deliberate. The weight of truth filled the space. Sophia was there, hesitant, shrinking. Victor tried his usual manipulation, charm, persuasion, intimidation, but it was futile. The evidence was irrefutable, the narrative undeniable. I was no longer the wife overshadowed by a husband and sister. I was the architect, the strategist, the rightful leader. We finalized legal filings the next morning. Ownership stakes, financial claims, and recognition of my contributions were formally submitted. Every document precise, every claim unassailable. I had transformed betrayal into leverage, anger into strategy, humiliation into authority. Victor attempted one last appeal, a desperate maneuver to salvage face. I reviewed it calmly, countered with evidence, and ensured that every step he took would legally reinforce my position. I walked away from the final meeting with a sense of triumph, but not arrogance. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. Recognition. Empowerment. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Not fear, not anger, not doubt, only clarity. I had reclaimed my life, my identity, my contributions, and my dignity. Every sleepless night, every hidden plan, every strategic step had led to this moment. Victor and Sophia had underestimated me. They had assumed fear, weakness, submission. But I had mastered strategy, precision, and unshakable resolve. They were left with nothing but the weight of truth, and I had everything. I smiled quietly. I was free. I was strong. I was unstoppable. And this was just the beginning.